Nathan was a successful 35-year-old CEO, running one of the largest companies in Lagos. He had wealth, influence, and a reputation that made people respect him. But despite all his success, there was one thing that Nathan's mother, Mrs. Williams, could never stop talking about: his refusal to settle down and start a family. She was desperate for him to get married and give her grandchildren. As the only child of his aging mother, this pressure weighed heavily on Nathan, but he wasn't ready to give up his carefree lifestyle. Mrs. Williams was always nagging him. "Nathan, you're not getting any younger. When will you stop fooling around with all these women and give me a grandchild?" she'd say, her voice filled with concern. Nathan would shrug it off with a charming smile, promising her that he wasn't ready for marriage yet. Deep down, Nathan loved his mother, but he enjoyed his life too much to settle down. He had always been a womanizer, moving from one relationship to the next, never taking any of them seriously. Nathan's reputation as a player was well known. Many of the secretaries he hired ended up in his bed. Once he got bored of them, they were swiftly fired and replaced with another pretty face. None of these women ever lasted long, and Nathan never felt guilty about it. He had everything he wanted: money, power, and beautiful women at his fingertips. But for his mother, this was becoming unbearable. Every family gathering, every social event, Mrs. Williams had to answer the same question from her friends: when is Nathan going to settle down? It was embarrassing for her, and it broke her heart to think that her son might never give her the grandchildren she longed for. One evening, after another long day at the office, Nathan came home to find his mother sitting on the living room sofa, looking more serious than usual. He knew what was coming. It was the same conversation they had had 100 times before. "Nathan," she began softly, "I know you love your life the way it is. But you're 35 now and I'm getting older. I won't be around forever, and I want to see my grandchildren before I leave this earth." Nathan sighed, rubbing his temples. "Mom, I've told you before, I'm not ready. I'm busy with the company, and I don't have time for marriage or kids right now." Mrs. Williams frowned, her brows knitting together in frustration. "Nathan, it's not about you being ready. It's about responsibility. You have everything a man could ever want, but what good is it if you don't have a family to share it with? What happens when you're old and lonely?" Her words hit him harder than he wanted to admit. Nathan had never really thought about growing old alone. In his mind, there was always time to settle down later. But his mother's words made him feel a pang of guilt, though not enough to change his mind. "I understand, Mom, but please let me live my life the way I want to. When the time is right, I'll find someone," Nathan said, standing up, hoping to escape the conversation. Mrs. Williams looked at him with sad eyes. She wasn't ready to give up on her dream of being a grandmother, and she knew her son too well to believe he would change on his own. So she devised a plan. Unknown to Nathan, Mrs. Williams decided to take matters into her own hands. She couldn't wait any longer for him to find a wife or settle down, so she came up with a clever scheme that she hoped would finally give her the grandchild she had always wanted. The next morning, Mrs. Williams made a call to a young woman named Lucy. Lucy was struggling financially and desperately needed money to support her family. Mrs. Williams had heard about Lucy from a friend who mentioned that she was hardworking but in a difficult situation. Mrs. Williams saw an opportunity and decided to offer Lucy a job, one that was a little different from the usual kind. When Lucy arrived at Mrs. Williams' house, she was nervous. She had no idea what this wealthy woman wanted from her. Sitting down in the lavish living room, Lucy felt out of place. Mrs. Williams smiled warmly at her, but there was a glint of calculation in her eyes. "Lucy, I've heard about you. I know you're a hard-working girl, and I'd like to offer you a job," Mrs. Williams began. Lucy's heart leaped with excitement. She needed money badly, and a job with a wealthy woman like Mrs. Williams could change her life. "Thank you, Ma. I'm ready to work hard," Lucy replied eagerly. Mrs. Williams leaned forward, lowering her voice. "This job is a little different. I'm willing to pay you 10 million naira if you can do something for me." Lucy's eyes widened. 10 million naira. That was more money than she could ever imagine. "What do you want me to do?" she asked, curiosity tinged with hesitation. Mrs. Williams smiled. I want you to seduce my son, Nathan. Get close to him, make him fall for you, and most importantly, get pregnant with his child. Once you've given birth, you can take your 10 million and leave. You won't have to worry about anything again. Lucy's jaw dropped. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. You want me to seduce your son, she repeated, stunned. Yes, that's the job. Don't worry, Nathan won't know a thing. I just want a grandchild, Lucy. I'll take care of everything. You'll never have to see us again after the baby is born, Mrs. Williams explained calmly. Lucy sat back, her mind racing. It was a crazy plan, but 10 million naira could change her life forever. After a moment's thought, she nodded slowly. I'll do it. Mrs. Williams smiled, satisfied. Good. You'll start as his live-in cleaner. I'll make sure he agrees. Just follow my plan, and you'll have your money. And so, the wheels were set in motion. Mrs. Williams had a plan, and she was confident it would work. Little did she know, however, that things wouldn't go exactly as she hoped. Lucy had her own ideas, and Nathan, the carefree bachelor, was about to fall into a trap that would change his life forever. Nathan didn't like the idea of having a live-in cleaner at all. He was a man who cherished his privacy, and the last thing he wanted was someone constantly hovering around his personal space. He especially didn't want a woman living under the same roof as him. His history with women made that clear. So, when his mother brought up the idea of hiring a live-in cleaner, Nathan flatly refused. I don't need anyone living here, Mom. I can handle myself, Nathan said, lounging on his expensive leather couch, sipping from a glass of whiskey. Mrs. Williams, calm and determined, wasn't backing down. She had already hired Lucy, and now she just needed to get Nathan to agree. She smiled sweetly, leaning forward to press her point. Nathan, the house is too big for you to manage alone. You've been so busy with the company, and I worry about you. It's just a cleaner, someone to help keep things tidy. Besides, she won't bother you. She'll stay out of your way, Mrs. Williams said, her voice gentle but firm. Nathan shook his head, uninterested. Mom, I don't need anyone. You're worrying too much. Mrs. Williams sighed. Nathan, please. I've already arranged for her to start. Just try it for a few weeks, and if you're still not happy, we'll find another solution. Nathan stared at his mother, noticing the seriousness in her eyes. He didn't want to argue with her anymore. The truth was, she had been going on and on about this for days, and it was starting to wear him down. Besides, if agreeing to this would get her off his back, maybe it wasn't the worst idea. All right, he said reluctantly. But if I don't like her, she's gone. Understood. Mrs. Williams smiled, relieved. Understood, dear. You won't even notice she's there. A few days later, Lucy arrived at Nathan's house, suitcase in hand. Dressed modestly in simple clothes, she looked every bit the part of a hard-working cleaner. But beneath the surface, Lucy's mind was already calculating how she would approach Nathan. She had a job to do, a job that could change her life forever. The first few days, Lucy kept her distance, carefully observing Nathan's routines. He was handsome, with broad shoulders and a strong jawline, the kind of man any woman would be attracted to. But he also had a certain arrogance about him, a confidence that came from being a successful businessman who could have anything or anyone he wanted. Lucy knew she couldn't come on too strong. Nathan was used to women throwing themselves at him, and if she appeared too eager, he might lose interest quickly. She had to be subtle, patient, and smart. After all, Nathan was no ordinary man. He was the CEO of a major company, and he was used to getting his way. At first, Nathan barely noticed her. Lucy was quiet, doing her cleaning without making a fuss, just as his mother had promised. She was careful not to invade his personal space, keeping to the background while she tidied up the house. But as the days passed, Lucy began to slowly insert herself into Nathan's routine. She started making small talk, offering him coffee in the mornings, and making sure she was around when he came home from work. She would compliment him on his achievements at the company, subtly feeding his ego without overdoing it. Nathan, always a sucker for admiration, began to soften a little. One evening, after a particularly long day at work, Nathan came home to find the house smelling of freshly cooked food. Lucy had prepared dinner, setting the table with a simple but delicious meal. Nathan, surprised by the gesture, raised an eyebrow as he looked at her. "What's all this?" he asked, his tone curious. Lucy smiled shyly, her eyes meeting his for just a second before looking away. "I noticed you've been working late and thought you might appreciate a home-cooked meal. I hope that's all right." Nathan was taken aback. He hadn't had a proper home-cooked meal in ages. His usual routine involved takeout or dining at fancy restaurants with clients or women he was seeing. But this, a simple meal prepared by someone in his own home, felt strangely comforting. He sat down and took a bite, nodding in approval. "It's good," he said, almost grudgingly. Lucy smiled again, but this time there was a flicker of something else in her eyes, something that Nathan didn't catch. She was playing her cards carefully, knowing that a man like Nathan wasn't won over by just one gesture. She needed to make him trust her, to make him believe that she was different from all the other women who had come and gone from his life. One evening, when Nathan came home late from work, he found Lucy still awake, cleaning the living room. She was wearing a simple dress that hugged her figure in just the right way. Her long black hair was neatly tied back, and there was a soft, pleasant smile on her face as she worked. "Lucy, why are you still up?" Nathan asked, a little surprised to see her. He was used to coming home late and finding the house empty, except for his own thoughts. "Oh, I was just finishing up," Lucy replied sweetly. "I didn't want to leave things undone." Nathan nodded, a little distracted. For the first time he really noticed Lucy. She wasn't like the other women he dated, flashy and loud. There was something quiet and unassuming about her that caught his attention. He quickly brushed off the thought and headed to his room. But over the next few days, Nathan couldn't help but notice Lucy more and more. She was always around, working diligently but never getting in his way. Unlike his previous secretaries, Lucy didn't throw herself at him. She kept her distance, which intrigued Nathan even more. One night, about a month after Lucy had started working for him, Nathan was sitting in the living room after a long day at work. He had a glass of whiskey in his hand, trying to unwind. Lucy was finishing her cleaning, as usual. As she moved around the room, Nathan watched her out of the corner of his eye. "Lucy," he called out suddenly. She stopped what she was doing and looked at him, her expression calm and composed. "Yes, sir." "Sit down for a minute," he said, motioning to the seat across from him. Lucy hesitated for a moment before obeying. Nathan studied her carefully. "You've been working here for a while now," he began, his voice casual. "I never really get a chance to talk to you." Lucy smiled softly, her heart racing. This was the moment she had been waiting for. "I'm just here to do my job, sir," she replied humbly. Nathan smirked. "You can call me Nathan. And tell me, why did you take this job? Or young? Don't you have other things you want to do?" Lucy hesitated for a moment, carefully choosing her words. "I needed the money," she admitted. "My family's going through a hard time, and this job came at the right moment." Nathan nodded thoughtfully. "I see. Well, you've been doing a good job." "Thank you, Nathan," Lucy replied, her smile growing a little wider. There was a brief silence between them before Nathan spoke again. "You're different from the other women I've been around," he said quietly. Lucy raised an eyebrow, pretending to be surprised. "Different how?" Nathan leaned back in his chair, swirling the whiskey in his glass. "You don't try to impress me. You just do your work and keep to yourself. I like that." Lucy felt a spark of hope. She was getting through to him. "I'm just here to help, Nathan," she said softly, her eyes locking with his for a moment. As the days passed, Lucy and Nathan's interactions became more frequent. He started talking to her more, asking her about her life and her family. Lucy played her role perfectly, always humble, always respectful. She never pushed too hard, but slowly, she let Nathan see a little more of her personality. She told him about her struggles, about how hard life had been for her and her family, which made Nathan sympathize with her. Soon, Nathan began to invite her to sit with him more often. They would talk late into the night, and Lucy would always make sure to listen attentively, giving Nathan the attention he craved. She never made any moves, waiting patiently for Nathan to come to her. One evening, after a particularly long day at the office, Nathan came home in a foul mood. He had just lost an important deal, and nothing seemed to be going right. As he sat in the living room, brooding, Lucy came into the room with a cup of tea. "I thought you might need this," she said softly, placing the cup on the table in front of him. Nathan looked up, surprised by the gesture. "Thanks," he muttered, taking the cup. He sipped the tea in silence for a moment before looking at Lucy. "Why are you always so calm? Don't you ever get angry?" Lucy smiled softly. "I've learned that being calm helps me get through the tough times." Nathan nodded, staring at her for a long moment. He had never met anyone like Lucy before. She wasn't like the other women he had dated. She was patient, kind, and understanding. And before he knew it, Nathan found himself falling into her trap. A few weeks later, after another late night of talking, Nathan kissed Lucy for the first time. It was a simple kiss, but it was enough to seal the beginning of their relationship. Lucy had done it. She had seduced the bachelor who had vowed never to take any woman seriously. And now Nathan was hooked. But this was only the beginning of Lucy's plan. She still had to get pregnant, and once that happened, her life would change forever. Lucy's plan was progressing exactly as Mrs. Williams had hoped. Nathan had fallen for her charm, and now they were in a relationship. To him, it seemed like he had found someone different, someone who wasn't interested in his money or status, someone he could talk to late into the night. Little did he know that Lucy's intentions were far from pure. A few months into their relationship, Lucy decided it was time to move to the next step, getting pregnant. She knew that once she had Nathan's child, her place in his life would be secured. But deep down, Lucy was beginning to feel conflicted. At first, the 10 million naira Mrs. Williams promised was all she cared about. Now, after spending months in Nathan's life, she realized how much more she could gain by staying with him permanently. Why settle for just the money when she could have everything? Lucy stopped taking her birth control pills, and within a few weeks, she started feeling the early signs of pregnancy. She missed her period, and soon enough, her suspicions were confirmed. Lucy was pregnant with Nathan's child. When she told Nathan, his reaction was a mixture of shock and excitement. He had never planned on becoming a father so soon, but he didn't feel upset about the news. In fact, a part of him felt proud that he was going to be a father. Lucy watched his face closely as he processed the information. "You're sure?" Nathan asked, his voice filled with disbelief as he stared at her. Lucy smiled, placing her hand on her belly. "Yes, Nathan, I'm sure. We're going to have a baby." Nathan blinked, the weight of her words sinking in. "A baby?" He repeated the word like he was trying to get used to it. Then, slowly, a grin spread across his face. "I'm going to be a father." Lucy let out a sigh of relief. Everything was going according to plan, and now Nathan seemed happy. But there was still one person who had to know about the pregnancy: Mrs. Williams. She had orchestrated this whole scheme, and Lucy knew she wouldn't be happy if she found out Lucy was planning to stay for good. A few days later, Lucy met with Mrs. Williams at her home. The older woman looked pleased to see Lucy but also cautious, as if she already knew something was off. "Well, Lucy," Mrs. Williams began, her voice calm but firm, "I hear congratulations are in order." "You're pregnant?" Lucy nodded, folding her hands nervously in her lap. "Yes, I am." Mrs. Williams smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Good. Everything is going just as planned, then. Now remember the deal, Lucy. Once the baby is born, you'll take your money and disappear. You've done your part, and I'll get my grandchild." Lucy felt a twist in her stomach. She had known this conversation was coming, but now that it was happening, she wasn't ready to walk away from the life she had built. She cleared her throat before speaking. "Mrs. Williams, I've been thinking. Why should I leave? Nathan and I are together now, and we're going to have a child. I could stay and we could be a family." Mrs. Williams' smile faded, replaced by a steely glare. "That wasn't the plan, Lucy," she said coldly. "You were hired to get pregnant, not to become part of this family. You'll get your 10 million naira as promised, but you need to leave once the baby is born." Lucy's heart raced, but she stood her ground. "I don't think I want to leave," she said quietly. "Why should I settle for 10 million naira when I could have so much more? Nathan trusts me and we're having a child together. I could stay, and I could give my child a good life." Mrs. Williams' eyes narrowed, fury rising within her. "Listen to me, Lucy. You made a deal and you will stick to it. Nathan will never marry you, and you will never be a part of this family. If you think you can manipulate my son into staying with you, you're mistaken." But Lucy wasn't backing down. The more Mrs. Williams threatened her, the more determined she became. "I don't think Nathan would appreciate knowing about the deal we made," she said, her voice steady. "In fact, I think he'd be very upset if he found out that his own mother paid me to seduce him." Mrs. Williams froze. She hadn't expected this. Lucy had turned the tables on her, and there was nothing she could do about it without risking her relationship with Nathan. If Nathan ever found out the truth, he would be devastated and might never forgive her. Mrs. Williams clenched her jaw, trying to regain control of the situation. "You're playing a dangerous game, Lucy," she warned. "If you stay, I'll make sure you regret it." Lucy stood up, her resolve stronger than ever. "I'm not going anywhere," she declared. "Nathan is mine now, and I'm going to stay in his life, whether you like it or not." With that, Lucy left Mrs. Williams' house, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew she had crossed a line, but she didn't care. She had come too far to give up now. As the months went by, Lucy continued to live with Nathan, and the rift between him and his mother grew wider. Lucy started planting seeds of doubt in Nathan's mind, subtly turning him against Mrs. Williams. She would make small comments, questioning Mrs. Williams' intentions and bringing up her past mistakes. "She's always been so controlling," Lucy would say. "I wonder why she doesn't trust you to make your own decisions." Nathan, who already had a complicated relationship with his mother, began to believe Lucy's lies. Mrs. Williams had made mistakes in the past, and Lucy used that to her advantage. She exaggerated stories, fabricated incidents, and painted Mrs. Williams as a manipulative woman who didn't want her son to be happy. It wasn't long before Nathan stopped talking to his mother altogether. He ignored her calls and avoided her at family gatherings, and Lucy was always there to comfort him, whispering sweet words that only deepened his mistrust. Mrs. Williams, on the other hand, was powerless to stop it. She couldn't tell Nathan the truth about her deal with Lucy without ruining her relationship with him forever. So she stayed silent, watching helplessly as her son slipped further and further away from her. As Lucy's pregnancy reached its final stage, her excitement and anticipation grew. She felt invincible. She had seduced Nathan, driven a wedge between him and his mother, and was about to give birth to his child. In her mind, the future was hers to shape, and it looked golden. Nathan, unaware of the growing storm around him, eagerly prepared for fatherhood. He bought a large, luxurious crib, filled the nursery with toys, and painted the room in warm, bright colors. His excitement for his unborn child was genuine. Despite being a notorious womanizer, Nathan was ready to be a father. He envisioned a life where he could teach his child about the world and be the father he always wished he had. Lucy went into labor on a stormy night. Nathan rushed her to the hospital, his heart pounding with anticipation. As he sat in the waiting room, pacing back and forth, he couldn't help but feel a deep connection to the unborn child. The idea of being a father thrilled him in ways he hadn't expected. His past as a womanizer didn't matter anymore. He was ready to embrace this new chapter of his life. Several hours later, a nurse came out with a broad smile. "Congratulations, Mr. Nathan," she said. "You're the father of a healthy baby boy." Nathan's heart leaped with joy. Son. He had a son. He rushed to Lucy's side, where she lay holding their newborn baby. The moment Nathan saw the tiny infant, swaddled in a soft blue blanket, tears welled up in his eyes. He gently picked up the baby, feeling a sense of responsibility and love wash over him. "He's beautiful," Nathan whispered, his voice filled with awe as he cradled his son. "We'll name him Joshua." Lucy smiled weakly, tired but victorious. She had done it. She had given Nathan a child, and now she had even more leverage to secure her place in his life permanently. For the next few weeks, life seemed perfect. Nathan doted on Joshua, spending every moment he could with him. Lucy played the part of the loving mother and partner flawlessly, basking in the luxury and comfort that Nathan provided. She moved into the master bedroom and made herself at home, relishing the life she had always dreamed of. But Mrs. Williams wasn't blind to what was happening. She could see the changes in Nathan. He barely returned her calls, and when they did speak, it was brief and distant. Lucy's influence was stronger than ever, and now with the baby, Mrs. Williams knew it would only get worse. One evening, Mrs. Williams gathered her courage and went to visit Nathan's house, hoping to see her grandchild. She hadn't been invited to the hospital, and she had barely seen the baby since his birth. As she arrived at the house, Lucy opened the door, her face tight with annoyance. "What are you doing here?" Lucy asked sharply. "I came to see my grandson," Mrs. Williams replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'm his grandmother." Lucy crossed her arms, blocking the doorway. "We weren't expecting you, Mrs. Williams. Nathan is busy." "I don't need an invitation to see my son and grandson," Mrs. Williams shot back, her patience wearing thin. "Now move aside." Lucy hesitated for a moment, then stepped back reluctantly. Mrs. Williams entered the house, her eyes scanning the room for any sign of her son. She spotted Nathan in the living room, sitting on the couch with baby Joshua in his arms. "Nathan," Mrs. Williams called out, her voice soft but filled with emotion. Nathan looked up, his face hardening as he saw his mother. He shifted Joshua in his arms but didn't stand to greet her. "What are you doing here, Mom?" "I came to see my grandson," Mrs. Williams said, walking toward them. She reached out to touch Joshua's tiny hand, but Nathan subtly pulled the baby away, his expression cold. "Lucy told me you were busy," he said, glancing briefly at Lucy, who stood smirking in the corner. Mrs. Williams' heart sank. She could feel the distance between them growing wider, and Lucy was the cause. "Nathan, we haven't spoken in weeks. I just wanted to spend some time with you and the baby." Nathan sighed, standing up and passing Joshua to Lucy. "Mom, we've talked about this. I need space." Mrs. Williams blinked, her eyes stinging with unshed tears. "Nathan, I'm your mother. I'm just trying to be a part of your life." Lucy, holding Joshua now, couldn't resist adding fuel to the fire. "Mrs. Williams, maybe you should give Nathan some time. He's been very busy with the baby." Mrs. Williams shot Lucy a glare, but Nathan's words stung more than anything Lucy could say. "Mom, Lucy's right. You need to back off a little. This is our family now." Family. The words hit Mrs. Williams like a punch to the gut. She had orchestrated the whole thing, yet now she was being pushed out of her own son's life. She had lost control and Lucy was winning. Without another word, Mrs. Williams turned and left the house, her heart breaking with each step. After Mrs. Williams left, Lucy couldn't help but feel triumphant. She had driven a wedge so deep between Nathan and his mother that it felt almost unbreakable. Now, with Joshua in the picture, Lucy was sure that Nathan would marry her sooner or later. But what she didn't realize was that her carefully laid plans were beginning to unravel in ways she couldn't foresee. As Nathan stood by the window, watching his mother's car drive away, a tiny doubt flickered in his mind. He didn't know why, but for the first time in months, he wondered if maybe, just maybe, his mother wasn't the villain Lucy had made her out to be. 5 years passed, and life for Nathan seemed almost settled. Joshua, now a bright and energetic child, had become the center of Nathan's world. He loved his son deeply, more than anything else in his life. Nathan had grown into his role as a father, and although he hadn't married Lucy, she remained a constant presence in his life. He wasn't entirely sure if he loved her, but the bond they shared through Joshua made them a family, or so it seemed on the surface. Lucy, on the other hand, had grown more confident in her place. She still had hopes of marrying Nathan and securing her future once and for all. Every day, she pushed for a commitment, but Nathan always managed to dodge the question. While Lucy had everything she had once dreamed of, wealth, status, and comfort, there was one thing missing: Nathan's full devotion. In the past 2 years, something had shifted. Nathan had hired a new secretary, a woman named Evelyn. She was different from the others Nathan had employed before. Evelyn was professional, intelligent, and most importantly, she resisted Nathan's advances. Unlike the many women who had come and gone from his office, Evelyn never entertained his flirtations. She didn't bend to his charm, and this piqued Nathan's interest in ways he hadn't expected. For 2 years, Nathan tried to win Evelyn's affections, but she remained distant, focused solely on her job. Her mysteriousness intrigued Nathan, and soon what started as a challenge for him began to develop into something deeper. Without realizing it, he was falling for her, and this only made things more complicated with Lucy. Lucy noticed the change in Nathan's behavior. He wasn't as affectionate toward her as he used to be, and he spent more and more time at work. Whenever she asked him about his day or tried to discuss their future, Nathan seemed distracted. He avoided her questions about marriage, and though he was always kind, Lucy felt the growing emotional distance between them. One evening, Lucy couldn't contain her frustration any longer. She cornered Nathan in the living room after Joshua had gone to bed. "Nathan, we need to talk," Lucy said, her voice firm but laced with desperation. Nathan looked up from the book he was pretending to read, sensing the seriousness in her tone. He sighed and put the book down. "What is it, Lucy?" "It's been 5 years," she began, pacing back and forth. "We have a son together. I've been patient, but I need to know, are we ever going to get married? I'm not asking for much, Nathan, but I deserve to know where we stand." Nathan rubbed his temples, feeling the weight of her words. He had been avoiding this conversation for too long. "Lucy, I care about you and I love Joshua, but I'm just not ready for marriage right now. You know how I feel." Lucy's face hardened. 5 years, Nathan. 5 years, and you're still not ready. What is it, then? Are you waiting for someone else? Is there another woman? Nathan hesitated for a moment, and Lucy saw it, a flicker of something in his eyes. Her heart sank. "There is someone else, isn't there?" she demanded, her voice rising. Nathan stood up, running a hand through his hair. "Lucy, it's not what you think." "Then tell me what it is," she snapped, her anger boiling over. "Who is she?" Nathan took a deep breath. He couldn't lie anymore. "It's Evelyn, my secretary." Lucy's world seemed to crash around her. Evelyn. The name she had heard a few times but had never paid much attention to. She had assumed Nathan's flirtations with his new secretary were harmless, just like the others. But now, hearing it confirmed, her worst fear was realized. "You've been seeing her," Lucy whispered, her voice shaking with betrayal. "No," Nathan replied quickly. "I haven't been seeing her, but I think I'm falling for her, Lucy. She's different." The room fell silent, and Lucy's hands trembled. How could this be happening? She had worked so hard to secure her place in Nathan's life, to ensure that she and Joshua would be taken care of forever. And now, a woman she barely knew was threatening to tear it all apart. "You can't do this to me, Nathan," Lucy said, her voice breaking. "We have a child together. We're a family." "I know, Lucy," Nathan said, guilt washing over him. "I love Joshua, but I can't force myself to marry you just because of that. It wouldn't be right." Tears filled Lucy's eyes as she realized how fragile her position truly was. She had thought having Nathan's child would guarantee her future, but now everything seemed to be slipping away. In her mind, marrying Nathan was the only way to secure her place. But now that dream was crumbling. As Lucy tried to process the shock of Nathan's confession, a new threat emerged from her past: a threat she had never anticipated. One afternoon, while Nathan was at work and Lucy was alone at home with Joshua, her phone rang. She glanced at the number on the screen, and her heart stopped. It was Eric, her ex-boyfriend, the father of her child. Panic surged through Lucy as she stared at the phone. How did Eric find her? She hadn't spoken to him in years, not since she left him to pursue the life she now had with Nathan. She hesitated for a moment, then answered the call, her voice shaky. "Hello, Lucy." Eric's voice was calm but filled with underlying tension. "We need to talk." "I don't know what you're talking about," Lucy lied, her pulse racing. "I've moved on, Eric. There's nothing left to say." "I know about the child," Eric said, his voice cutting through her lies like a knife. "Joshua. He's mine, isn't he?" Lucy's breath caught in her throat. "That's ridiculous. Don't play games with me, Lucy," Eric said sternly. "No. I've seen him. He looks just like me. And I remember how you disappeared after we split. I'm not stupid." Lucy's mind whirled with panic. How had Eric found out? She had been so careful. If Nathan ever found out the truth, that Joshua wasn't his son but Eric's, it would destroy everything. "You're mistaken, Eric," Lucy said, trying to sound confident. "Joshua is Nathan's child." "We'll see about that," Eric replied, his voice dark. "I want to meet my son, Lucy. And if you don't agree, I'll make sure Nathan knows the truth." The line went dead, and Lucy stared at the phone in horror. Her perfect world was crumbling, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. Eric's reappearance in her life threatened to expose the secret she had fought so hard to keep hidden. If Nathan found out, he would never forgive her. And worse, she would lose everything. Lucy knew she had to act fast, but she had no idea how to fix the mess she was in. Lucy paced the room, trying to think of a solution. She couldn't let Eric ruin everything. She couldn't lose Nathan, the lifestyle she had grown accustomed to, or the security of knowing that her future was tied to Joshua's. But most of all, she feared losing Nathan's love for Joshua. Nathan adored the boy, believing him to be his own flesh and blood. If the truth came out, it would destroy him. And Lucy knew that Nathan would never forgive her for the deception. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of the front door opening. Nathan was home. Lucy quickly composed herself, wiping the panic from her face and forcing a smile as she greeted him. "Hey, how was work?" Nathan looked exhausted. His tie loosened and his shirt wrinkled from the long day. "It was fine," he said, giving her a brief smile. "Just a lot to deal with as usual." Lucy watched him closely, trying to gauge his mood. She couldn't let on that something was wrong. "Do you want to talk about it?" she asked, her voice soft and inviting. Nathan shook his head. "No, I'm fine. I just need to relax." As Nathan settled into the living room, Lucy's mind raced with possibilities. She knew she had to do something about Eric before he made good on his threat. But what could she do? Eric was determined, and if he showed up or contacted Nathan directly, the truth would be out of her hands. A knock on the door startled her, and Lucy's heart jumped. Was it Eric? She hurried to the door, her pulse quickening as she opened it. To her relief, it wasn't Eric. It was the nanny with Joshua, returning from their day out. "Hi, ma'am," the nanny greeted cheerfully. "Joshua had a great day at the park." Lucy smiled at her son as he ran inside, his small arms outstretched toward her. "Mommy." "Hey, baby," Lucy said, scooping him up into a hug. Her heart ached as she held him close, knowing that her love for Joshua was real, even if their situation was built on lies. She couldn't let anything tear them apart. Later that night, after Joshua had gone to bed, Lucy sat in the living room, unable to sleep. Nathan had already gone upstairs, oblivious to the storm brewing beneath the surface. Lucy knew she couldn't avoid Eric forever. She had to take control of the situation before it spiraled out of hand. The next morning, Lucy decided to confront Eric directly. She called him back, her voice firm despite the fear gnawing at her. "Eric, we need to meet." Eric sounded smug on the other end of the line. "I knew you'd come around. Let's talk, tomorrow at the cafe downtown." Lucy reluctantly agreed, knowing she had no choice. She couldn't let Eric go to Nathan with the truth. She had to find a way to convince him to stay quiet. The next day, Lucy arrived at the cafe, her nerves on edge. She spotted Eric sitting at a table near the window, his expression unreadable as he watched her approach. As she sat down across from him, Eric wasted no time getting to the point. "I want to be part of Joshua's life," he said, his tone matter-of-fact. "He's my son and I have a right to know him." Lucy's heart sank. She had feared this. "Eric, you can't just show up after all these years and expect to be part of his life," she said, her voice trembling. "Joshua has a father, Nathan. He loves him. You can't take that away from him." Eric's expression hardened. "I'm not trying to take him away from anyone, but I have a right to know my own child. And if you don't let me, I'll go to Nathan and tell him everything. I'm sure he'd love to know that the boy he's been raising isn't his." Lucy felt the walls closing in on her. She had no idea how to handle this. "Eric, please. If you tell Nathan, it will destroy him. He loves Joshua. He thinks he's his son. You can't do this." Eric leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "I don't care about Nathan. Care about my son. And if you don't let me be a part of his life, I will expose everything." Lucy knew there was no reasoning with Eric. He was determined, and there was nothing she could say to change his mind. She needed a way to stop him, but how? As she sat there, trying to think of a solution, an idea formed in her mind. It was risky, but it was the only chance she had to keep Eric quiet. "What if I pay you?" Lucy blurted out, desperate to find a way out of this mess. "I'll give you money, enough to live comfortably. Just stay out of Joshua's life." Eric raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. "How much are we talking?" Lucy hesitated. She didn't have much money of her own, but she was willing to do whatever it took to protect her secret. 10 million naira, she offered, hoping it would be enough to satisfy him. Eric's lips curled into a smirk. 10 million, huh? That's not bad. But I think I deserve more. After all, I've been out of my son's life for 5 years. I'll settle for 20 million. Lucy's stomach dropped. 20 million naira was more than she could afford, but she had no choice. If she didn't agree, Eric would go straight to Nathan, and everything would come crashing down. "Fine," Lucy said, her voice shaky. 20 million. But you have to stay away from Joshua. And from Nathan. Eric nodded, satisfied. I'll give you a week to get the money together. If I don't hear from you by then, I'll go straight to Nathan. Lucy left the cafe feeling sick to her stomach. How was she going to come up with 20 million naira? She had only a fraction of that amount saved. Desperation clawed at her as she realized that her only option was to turn to Nathan for the money. But how could she ask him without raising suspicion? And even if she managed to get the money, would that be enough to keep Eric quiet forever? Lucy sat on the edge of her bed, her heart pounding as the weight of Eric's demands crushed her. 20 million naira. Where could she possibly get that kind of money? Nathan might have that much, but she couldn't just ask him without arousing suspicion. And the thought of her whole life unraveling terrified her. She had built everything on lies, but now those lies were closing in, threatening to destroy her carefully constructed world. The next morning, Lucy put on a brave face as she prepared breakfast for Nathan and Joshua. Joshua was already in his high chair, babbling excitedly as he played with his toys. Nathan was reading the newspaper, sipping his coffee. Everything seemed so normal, but Lucy knew that at any moment, her world could come crashing down. As she watched Nathan interact with Joshua, her heart ached. She knew how much he loved the boy. And Joshua adored Nathan, always calling him Daddy. If Nathan found out the truth, that Joshua wasn't his son, it would shatter him. Lucy couldn't bear the thought of losing everything. She had to find a way out. "Lucy, are you okay?" Nathan's voice broke through her thoughts, pulling her back to reality. Lucy forced a smile. "I'm fine. Just thinking about some things." Nathan gave her a concerned look but didn't press further. "If you need to talk, I'm here. I know, she said softly, feeling a pang of guilt. Nathan had always been kind to her, and she was about to betray him in the worst way. But she couldn't think about that now. She had to focus on finding a solution. Later that day, Lucy decided to meet up with a close friend, Emily, someone she trusted. Maybe Emily could help her figure out what to do. They met at a quiet cafe in town. Lucy looked around nervously, making sure no one was watching them. She couldn't risk anyone overhearing their conversation. Emily noticed Lucy's anxiety and leaned in. "What's going on, Lucy? You look like you've seen a ghost." Lucy sighed, her hands trembling as she gripped her cup of coffee. "It's complicated. I don't even know where to start." Emily raised an eyebrow. "Pray me. I've known you for years, and I've never seen you like this." Taking a deep breath, Lucy told Emily everything. The deal with Nathan's mother, the fact that Joshua wasn't really Nathan's son, and Eric's sudden reappearance, demanding 20 million naira. Emily listened quietly, her face a mixture of shock and concern. "Lucy, this is a mess," Emily said when Lucy finished. "How could you let it get this far?" "I didn't mean for it to happen," Lucy said, tears welling up in her eyes. "Just spiraled out of control. And now, if I don't come up with the money, Eric will tell Nathan everything. I can't lose Joshua, Emily. I love him." Emily sighed and shook her head. "You should have been honest from the start. But now the only way out is to find that money. How much do you have saved?" Lucy looked down, ashamed. "Barely anything. I've been spending a lot, trying to keep up appearances." Emily thought for a moment. "Maybe there's another way. What if you tell Nathan yourself? Come clean before Eric does. It'll hurt, but at least you'll have a chance to explain your side." Lucy's heart raced at the thought. "I can't, Emily. If I tell him, he'll never forgive me. He'll hate me and I'll lose everything. I can't risk that." "Then what's your plan?" "Keep running from the truth until it catches up with you." Emily's voice was firm but compassionate. "Lucy, you're running out of time. Eric won't wait forever." Lucy felt trapped. No matter what she did, the outcome would be devastating. But she couldn't give up yet. She had to try something, anything to keep her world from falling apart. A few days later, Lucy found herself in Nathan's office, nervously pacing back and forth. She had decided to take a risk, one that could save her or doom her completely. She was going to ask Nathan for the money. When Nathan arrived, he looked surprised to see her there. "Lucy, is everything okay?" Lucy swallowed hard, trying to steady her voice. "Nathan, I need to talk to you about something important." Nathan set his briefcase down and sat behind his desk, gesturing for her to sit too. "What's going on?" Lucy sat down, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I know this is going to sound strange, but I need your help. Financial help." Nathan raised an eyebrow. "How much are we talking about?" Lucy hesitated. This was it, the moment that could make or break everything. 20 million naira. Nathan's eyes widened in shock. 20 million. What on earth do you need that kind of money for? Lucy's heart pounded. She had rehearsed this moment over and over, but now that it was happening, she wasn't sure she could go through with it. It's for an emergency. Something I can't explain right now, but I promise it's important." Nathan studied her closely, clearly confused by her vague explanation. "Lucy, I care about you, but this is a lot of money. I need to know what's going on." Lucy felt tears welling up in her eyes. She couldn't tell him the truth, not now. "Please, Nathan, just trust me. I wouldn't ask if it wasn't serious." Nathan leaned back in his chair, his expression softening. "Lucy, you know I'd do anything for you and Joshua. But I need to understand why you're asking for such a huge amount. Are you in some kind of trouble?" Lucy looked down at her hands, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I'm not in trouble, I just can't explain it. Please, Nathan, I need you to trust me." There was a long pause as Nathan looked at her, conflicted. He cared about Lucy, but this was a strange request, and her refusal to explain made it harder for him to agree. "I need to think about this, Lucy," Nathan said finally. I can't make this decision right now. Lucy nodded, wiping her tears. I understand. I just hope you'll help me. As Lucy left the office, she felt a sinking feeling in her chest. Nathan hadn't agreed to give her the money, and now she was running out of time. Eric would come for her, and when he did, everything would fall apart. Back at home, Lucy sat in the dark, holding Joshua close. She kissed his forehead, her heart heavy with fear and regret. She had lied and schemed her way into this life, but now the truth was closing in, and there was no escaping it. A week passed, and Lucy could feel the tension growing in the air. Every day, she waited for Eric's call, for the moment when everything would come crashing down. Nathan had still not agreed to give her the money, and Lucy knew she couldn't stall much longer. The fear gnawed at her, and she found it harder to keep up the act in front of Nathan and Joshua. One afternoon, while Lucy was playing with Joshua in the living room, the doorbell rang. She froze, her heart racing. Could it be Eric? Had he come to expose everything? Nathan walked over to the door, opening it to reveal a man Lucy recognized immediately. It was Eric. Her heart sank as she saw him standing there, a smug expression on his face. Eric, Nathan said, confused. Who are you? Eric smiled slyly. I'm an old friend of Lucy's. We need to talk. Lucy's blood ran cold as Eric stepped inside the house. Her worst nightmare was about to come true. She felt like the walls were closing in on her, her carefully constructed world crumbling before her eyes. Nathan looked between Lucy and Eric, clearly sensing that something was wrong. Lucy, do you know this man? Lucy opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. She felt trapped, cornered. There was no way out of this. Eric wasn't going to leave until he got what he wanted, and he wasn't going to keep quiet any longer. Lucy and I go way back, Eric said, his voice dripping with arrogance. In fact, we share something very important. Nathan frowned, glancing at Lucy. What is he talking about? Lucy's heart pounded in her chest. She could feel her world collapsing around her. There was no more running, no more hiding. The truth was about to come out, whether she liked it or not. Eric smirked, enjoying the moment. Joshua. He's my son, not Nathan's. The words hung in the air like a bomb, detonating everything Lucy had fought to keep hidden. Nathan's face went pale, his eyes widening in shock as he turned to look at Lucy. Is this true? Nathan asked, his voice barely a whisper. Tears welled up in Lucy's eyes as she nodded, unable to speak. The guilt, the lies, everything came crashing down on her. There was no more hiding from the truth. How could you do this? Nathan's voice was filled with pain, betrayal flashing in his eyes. How could you let me believe Joshua was my son for all these years? Lucy sobbed, unable to control the flood of emotions overwhelming her. I never meant for it to get this far. It started as a lie, but I couldn't stop. I was scared you'd hate me. I thought if I could just make it work. Nathan held up a hand, cutting her off. This whole time, all the love I had for Joshua, thinking he was mine, it was all based on a lie. Lucy collapsed into a chair, her body trembling with grief. She had destroyed everything. She had betrayed Nathan in the worst way possible, and there was no coming back from it. Eric, still standing there with a smug grin, leaned against the doorframe. Well, now that the truth is out, how about we talk about what I came for? 20 million naira, or I go to the press with this whole story. I'm sure the media would love to hear about how a successful CEO was duped. Nathan's face twisted with anger as he looked at Eric. Get out. Eric raised an eyebrow. Excuse me. I said get out, Nathan repeated, his voice cold and firm. You think you can blackmail me? You're nothing but a parasite. You're not getting a cent from me. Eric smirked. We'll see about that. He turned and walked out the door, slamming it behind him. The tension in the room was thick, and Lucy could feel the weight of Nathan's stare on her. Why, Lucy? Nathan asked, his voice filled with pain. Why didn't you tell me the truth? Lucy wiped her tears, her voice shaking. I was scared, Nathan. I didn't know how to tell you. And then I fell in love with Joshua. And you, and I just couldn't bear the thought of losing everything. Nathan stood there for a long moment, his face filled with hurt. I trusted you. I loved Joshua. He may not be my biological son, but I raised him as my own. I know, Lucy whispered, her voice cracking. I'm so sorry, Nathan. I never meant for it to end like this. Nathan turned away, staring out the window. This is too much, Lucy. I don't know if I can forgive you. Lucy's heart shattered at his words. She had known this would be the outcome, but hearing it still hurt more than she could have imagined. For the next few days, the house was filled with silence. Nathan didn't speak to Lucy, barely even looked at her. He spent all his time with Joshua, trying to process the truth. The pain was clear in his eyes, and Lucy knew she had broken something that might never be fixed. I'll always care for Joshua, but I can't be with you anymore. The trust is gone, and I don't think we can get it back. Lucy nodded, tears streaming down her face. Please, Nathan, forgive me. Your mother caused all of this. Nathan turned to her with a deadly expression. What do you mean by mother caused all of this? Your mother was the one who hired me to get pregnant by you so she could have a grandchild. I didn't know I was already pregnant with Eric's baby, so instead of going back to Eric, I seduced you and pinned the pregnancy on you, Lucy replied. It was as if the wind had brought Mrs. Williams to the house. Immediately after Lucy called her name, Mrs. Williams appeared. Son, I only wanted what was best for you. I was tired of all the questions from my friends. I noticed you didn't want to be responsible, so I did what I thought was right. I know I was wrong, but I am your mother. Nathan turned to his mother with a deadly look. Mom, why did you cause all of this? I've invested 5 years of my life in lies just because you wanted to make decisions for me. I'm sorry, son. All this time I've been going through depression since you stopped talking to me. I wanted to tell you, but you shut me out. You know what? Both of you leave. I don't want to see you again. You both almost ruined my life. Lucy, pack your things. It's over. I'll make sure Joshua is taken care of, but it's time for us to part ways. And with that, Lucy left the house, her heart heavy with regret. She had lost everything. Nathan, the life she had built, and the future she had dreamed of. But as she walked away, she knew that this was the price she had to pay for her lies. Nathan went on to marry Evelyn, finding the love and honesty he had longed for. He forgave his mother, and though the wounds of the past would never fully heal, he knew that, in the end, he had made the right choice. Did you enjoy this story? Kindly let me know in the comments section. Sending special thanks to Felicia and Nadine from Jamaica, Alicia from Trinidad. If you want a special shout out, kindly tell me in the comments section. Till we meet again, besties.